Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with my co-host, Sabrina. Sabrina, how are you?
Hey Jane, great to be back. I'm doing great. I hit my 300th class at Rumble today. For
Ooh.
those listeners, yeah, I'm super proud. And you heard me talk about my obsession with Rumble boxing, but it's just such an amazing outlet, and they built such a awesome community here in Minnesota. And as I'm gonna be moving, I will dearly miss this place. They do have a Rumble in San Francisco, but I have yet to check that out and see all the logistics and if I can get there as diligently as I do here. But yeah, I'm feeling a little bit exhausted, but very excited for today. How are you?
I'm good. I think we need to write to Rumble to have them open up a couple more locations in San Francisco just for
Yes,
you. A
that would,
loyal Rumbler, if you will.
yeah, yes.
I'm good. I'm good. Well, the latest in my life is that I finally, after years of being behind everybody else, finally started playing pickleball. I've been talking, and I know this is an old people sport that turned young people thing, but I've been talking for the last like literally 2 years, a big game about how I'm gonna learn pickleball and I'm gonna dominate the court. I am now officially like in, I found a place in Lincoln Park. It's this nice indoor, like it's kind of bougie actually, but it's literally a pickleball like place, and they only do pickleball there. They also sell like smoothie, like kind of like a fancy gym. The
Mm.
smoothies and stuff are quite expensive, as you can imagine. But listen, it's a whole lifestyle that I'm about to like get into. But yeah, that's my thing is I'm feeling very sporty. I'm getting into my pickleball era, even though it's 2 years behind everybody else.
I'm proud of you. Just don't tear your ACL because I heard that's happening a lot.
Oh my gosh, yes. No, but the court is so competitive. Have to tell you guys another day because apparently people like talk crap. Like the older people are very aggressive and they're upset if you're on their team and if you're not good enough. So I have a little bit more work to do. Before we get into today's topic, I do want to give our listeners a trigger warning or a heads up that today's conversation has content that includes themes of near death experiences, which of course can be distressing to some of our listeners. So, giving that heads up to our audience, if this is not the right topic for you, you're always welcome to listen to one of our other episodes. With that said, we are talking about this idea of single mother by choice. Sabrina, you and I are both in our 30s. I feel like women or our girlfriends that are our age, this is like a hot topic. Part of it is because we see our friends and close family members having kids right around this age. For me, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm getting a lot of pressure from my family to have kids. Now, that said, I have a husband and we have been seriously talking about it. So it is kind of like on the, not to get too nerdy, but it's on the roadmap, if you will. But for a lot of our girlfriends, they're not at a place where maybe they're ready, but they feel this pressure. So,
Mhm.
anyways, we have our friend Nicci, who is joining us today to talk a little bit more about it because she is a single mother by choice. Nicci, why don't you go ahead and give our audience a quick introduction for who you are?
Yes, thank you so much. I am very excited to be here today and to be sharing my story because I have also benefited from many other women sharing their story. And this journey, even though it is single mother by choice, takes a village and takes a tribe, and you're
Mhm.
creating that tribe. So thank you. So I was listening to a few of your other episodes, and you asked this question, like, who are you? And people start by sharing a variety of different things. And I was like, okay, well, who am I? What do I want to say first? Like, is it my job? Is it where I live? So I'll start with I am a seeker. I seek my own limits physically by running ultra marathons. I seek knowledge and information. I'm a voracious reader of nonfiction. Right now, actually, the whole year of 2024, all the books I've been reading are about water, which
Ooh.
is strange for me because I live in Colorado Springs and I moved here from Chicago because I wanted to be in the mountains. And the last several years, a lot of my books have been about mountains. And I'm like, why are the books about water? And I actually found the answer, which maybe we'll talk about a little later. So I'm a seeker and I'm a mom. I am Gia's mom. And that is such a high honor. And so I also happen to work for LinkedIn. I'm a principal customer success manager, which is a job that, and I've been with LinkedIn for about 13 years in a variety of different roles, but you know, it's a job and I love it. I love the team I work with, but what excites me the most and what am I most passionate about, and maybe if you're watching this on video, my background is the military community inside of LinkedIn. I am a family member and an ally. My brother is a Marine Corps veteran, and so I got really involved in this community. And so as a military veteran and spouse advocate, that's a big part of my life too.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Nicci. It's so good to see you again. And I feel like ever since I met you, you've always been an inspiration to me, like whether it was the veteran community at LinkedIn, right? And just the dedication and the passion you poured into that. I always just admired you, and then following your journey with the ultra marathons and whatnot to now seeing you be a mom and just the way you talk about it, and you can see it's just like you're glowing. And I love that. But let's actually go all the way back to the beginning. So, like in terms of kids, is that something that you always wanted, alone or with a partner, or has that changed over time? Or is motherhood in general, like how did you think about that?
Yeah. So I grew up in a really big family. So my dad's side is Sicilian and my mom's side is Norwegian. And on both sides, there's like 15 grandkids. And so we were always with a bunch of cousins, which also meant that as a child, I was witnessing a bunch of aunts and uncles acting as parents and also seeing that like there's a family here and how like full and of life that like that environment was. And that was something I enjoyed, I thrived in, and I wanted. And even if I couldn't articulate that as like a young person in my 20s, I think it was just this feeling that lived inside of me. So I got married when I was 27 and I got divorced when I was 32. And part of the conversations with my ex-husband, I remember it very specifically. I said, do you want to have kids? Mind you, we are married, sitting in a house we bought together, already down this road. And his answer was, I like my life right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, did I marry someone that didn't want to have children? Now, that is a mistake I will never make again, right? Obviously, here we are, I have a child, but I was 27. Maybe I just assumed he wanted children because like it's all his mom talked about. It's all his two other brothers and their spouses talked about. I'm like, well, of course we're going to have kids. So there was that. And in that moment, I remember immediately feeling like, oh no, like what a perfect way to confirm for myself that I wanted to be a mom, that I wanted children. And that was a for sure decision. Because I think before that, it wasn't. And maybe a lot of people feel that way too, who are listening to this, like, well, how do I really know? And I don't know that you can really know. Maybe you do feel that way. And a lot of my friends who had kids much earlier knew. But what if you don't like have that feeling? And I'm not sure I did until that moment. So that was 2017. And fast forward to, you know, the pandemic, which was a lot of chaos and heartbreak and death and destruction and things that made us all say, well, what's important in life? And that was the first time I heard myself say out loud, I think I could have a baby on my own. So it was like 3 years after I had that initial feeling of I want to be a mom that I even that feeling got articulated out loud.
Wow. I just want to acknowledge also how you had that conversation with your then husband, right? And how powerful that was that you then took a step back and was like, what do I really want? And does this relationship still serve me? Because I think so many people then would be like, oh, whatever my husband wants, and I guess I'll just dismiss my own needs, right? And I think it's very relatable to so many of our audience and myself included. As a single woman, I'm actually much more, well, I try to be more deliberate about asking those types of questions up front, but it's always like hindsight, right? Like you try, as you were in this early dating stage, like trying to, have fun and all that, but then you do want to get to that, well, do you want to have kids or not? And also just for myself, like I did decide to freeze my eggs this year, but I still don't know if I really want kids. So for you to have that feeling and to have that one moment of this is my answer, I think that's really cool to get that clarity. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Did you at the time or throughout this journey, did you know others who went through the process also that had chose to have kids solo? Did you know anyone?
I did not know anyone personally. And
Okay.
so when we were talking about doing this show, it made me go back and think like, what was I like thinking about and doing during that time? Because it's easy to forget like how the whole pieces of this journey and like how I got here. So um I had the thought in May of 2020, like I think, and I literally said it out loud to standing around a kitchen island with my aunt, my two cousins, Janice and Kylie. And they're like, cool. Then like a couple months later, I said it out loud to my mom and sister. And I was like, I think I'll have a baby on my own. And they were both like, yeah. And then like in both situations, it kind of just stopped there, right? It wasn't because I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't even know LinkedIn had a fertility benefit. Um, and so then I started Googling single mother, finding donors. What do you do? Like all these things. And what I found was I had been journaling during that time. I use Evernote. I don't know if you both have heard of this. And I'm going to pull this up on my phone and kind of just read it to you because I thought it was such a nice journey down memory lane. So there was an article in Women's Health magazine about relationships. And I don't even know what the prompt was, but I had copy and pasted a quote from the article that said, the experience has in a way given me freedom I've never experienced. It taught me that we don't get to order a life plan like we order takeout. I'll have one loving husband, two adorable kids, one flexible but exciting career, one healthy body, the ability to travel with the dressing on the side. Nobody's life is tied up that neatly in a bow, not even my married friends. And so it was this woman talking about her experience. And like I said at the beginning of this, like I benefited from that woman literally sharing her life like in a magazine article, like because at the back of my mind is all of this stuff that whether it's true or not, I have chosen to grab onto as part of like the cultural narrative in our society and made it true in my own brain. That if I do this, I'm somehow not right. So I needed to like Google and find out like, well, what's really going on? Another thing I learned from my Googling was in London, the availability of donor sperm was like not available. And that in America, it is wildly available. And I was like, I was like, gratitude. Like, oh my gosh, like that's pretty lucky. So I didn't know anyone, but I took to the internet and immediately no longer felt alone.
This was something Sabrina and I were talking about as we were thinking through like this topic, is that there's probably more in our generation, like more women going through this process alone in our generation than previous generation, right? Like part of it could be, and maybe I'm wrong, like I don't necessarily have data to prove, but my gut is telling me, in previous generation, a lot of women maybe didn't have the opportunity to work and to be able to financially do this or raise children alone, or like society is now a lot more accepting of different types of family and how you raise and build your family. Maybe back in the days, there's this societal norm of like, you need to be in this type of family to be normal? Like you even mentioned earlier, is this normal? I think
Mhm.
part of us still wonder that, but we see a lot more types of families now. And so we're a lot more accepting of different lifestyle. And so I think like it's just fascinating to hear that there weren't a ton like in your family. And truthfully, mine or even Sabrina, we don't have a lot of people in our lives who have gone through this. And so it's just very fascinating to see like you have gone through it. A lot of the women in our lives are now kind of talking about it. And so it's becoming more and more prominent in our generation, hopefully in the future too.
Yes. And I mean, enter stage left. You have organizations like Progeny, which if anyone on this like listens to this, Google that. It's a fertility provider. I'm sure there's many other ones. It just happens to be what my company contracts with to provide fertility benefit to its employees. As in, you can go have your eggs frozen, you can go through IVF, IUI, and it's subsidized. So that, you know, just wasn't around probably 20 years ago. I don't know when Progeny started, but like things like that make it possible to be having these conversations.
Totally. Big shout out to Progeny. Also benefited
Yes.
from that one. They're
Yeah.
really gaining more traction, which is awesome. And yeah, it's and conversations like what we're having today with you and you opening the floor and helping normalize more of this like non-linear, right? Like I grapple with that every day because just as I'm a single woman in my mid-30s, I'm like, am I meant to not have a partner maybe? I don't know. And having that pressure from family, but really trying to separate myself from that and just, hey, maybe I'm just meant to live a different life and that's okay too. But I think that's really hard, right? So I just love that we're having this conversation today. So Nicci, it sounds like obviously that you went the route of sperm donor, but did you also consider other options like adoption, or was that not part of the equation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember saying out loud a few times to people that I want to be a mom and I am open to whatever winding road or journey gets me there. And adoption would be included in that. And I did consider that. And so I wanted to see first if I could use my own body. I wasn't super familiar with surrogacy. I have learned a ton about it now because I have decided, based on my birth experience, I had a near-death experience during birth. I do not want to be pregnant again and risk my own life. That just is something, and we can talk more about that. But I have 3 embryos remaining that are all male. If I had unlimited funds I would just have a surrogate for each one of those babies and have 4 babies. And that would be amazing. And Gia would have 3 brothers, and that would be so cool. But I don't have unlimited funds, but I, have researched a lot of different ways to have become a mom. But I did want to think first if I can use my body, which just a couple of things I want to kind of say and verbalize out loud. So number one, I entered this fertility journey by choice. A lot of biological XY chromosome people, happen to be women, enter this journey not by choice, but by need. So I'm very grateful that I was able to, first of all, have the fertility benefit through LinkedIn and be able to show up and use my own body for this. And then second of all, again, as a biological woman, and not a biological man, again, I can use my own body. And so that is a huge benefit. I've talked to many same-sex couples, male and female, who maybe can't use their own bodies to go through this process. And so there's a lot of like perspective and gratitude that I was also entering this process with.
Could you talk a little bit more about sort of the feelings that and emotions that you were exhibiting?
When they put up bumpers in a bowling alley and the like a little baby throws a ball down the alley and the ball hits like every side on the way down and like 20 times, that was me. So in August of 2021, I was 36 years old. I had moved to Colorado in January, picked up my life. I had completed a 200-mile race in my ultra marathon journey like the September before. I had done all these things. LinkedIn was in a pandemic. I got myself to Colorado, which was a dream, so that I could run in the mountains and be with my military community. And now I'm like, I'm ready for my baby. So I pick up the phone and I call one of the organizations that's under Progeny's fertility benefit locally in Colorado, CCRM or something.
Mm.
I don't necessarily need to out them, but this is like one of those stories where like I'm excited, I'm making the phone call. Like one of the quote in Gia's nursery above her bed is from Alice in Wonderland. Her whole nursery is Alice in Wonderland because I love the themes there. But the quote says, "Every adventure requires a first step."
Mm-hmm.
And that phone call was my first step. I'm like, let's do this. We're starting this fertility journey. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to get in with a doctor and I'm going to follow their instruction. Get on the phone. And the woman goes through a series of questions with me, like an intake call. And one of the questions was, how long have you and your partner been trying?
Mm.
Whoa, wait a minute. I think, that was 3 or 4 years ago now. I'm guessing that has come a long way and that maybe question is no longer part of their intake form. What if I'm part of a same-sex couple? What if I'm not in a couple? What if I don't have a partner? Oh my gosh, how like hurtful that question was to me. And that's like me bumping against the bumper. I'm doing great. And then, oh my God, reality hits me. The next thing that was really hard was, so when you start, and maybe you did this with freezing your eggs, they do like huge blood panel. They took so much blood out of me. I mean, it took an hour because I have really small veins. So I'm like sitting there. It's like when you give blood, sitting there for an hour. And I remember texting a photo of like 18 different blood vials sitting on the counter to one of my friends. And they're like, don't pass out. I'm like, I know, I need some juice. But they send out all your blood to get like, how's your vitamin D levels? How is your egg? Like they test so many things, which when Gia's older, we are going to start doing testing for her when she's like 16, 17. How are your hormones? Where are you at? How are things that are going on? Are there other factors in your life? These are things that like insurance companies and medical organizations they would never pay for unless it was like time to try fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Women's health can start much earlier. So I can get off my soapbox for a second. But what I found out during that blood test was that I have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which means I make eggs like I'm 19. I make a ton of eggs. That sounds like it's a good thing, but it's not. And I learned that if I were to have actually tried to get pregnant naturally, I wouldn't have been able to, or I would have a very hard time. Maybe you all have heard of PCOS.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe yes, I see you nodding.
Mhm.
So that actually guided my decision. I was like, oh my God, is this bad? What does that mean? I was like, well, it's not necessarily like hurting you, but we need to do IVF instead of IUI because when the sperm hits your eggs and like fertilizes the egg, your body will then release estrogen to like grow that egg and fertilize it. But because you have so many eggs, your body is going to release a finite amount of estrogen and only help fertilize so many of your eggs. And it might not fertilize the one that the sperm attached to. So having that many eggs is actually not good because you're not going to make enough estrogen naturally for that. And I was like, what? Oh my God. I think a lot of the questions that came up in my mind were like, what are people going to think of me?
Mm-hmm.
I think that question comes because society feels uncomfortable with a single woman. And that's like so unfair. And we can like unpack that in terms of like what's going on in the dating world. And I've been on the apps and it's just not a good situation. But like, what a sad like inbound feed of like information coming at us. And we can choose to like say, no, I don't believe that, but that's hard to do. And so one of the things I actually had to work with my therapist on, she was like, okay, is there anyone that you think that isn't going to approve of you? And I'm like, honestly, I actually feel like I have a ton of support from literally everybody. Mom, dad, cousins, aunts, uncles. They'd be all like, yes, oh my God, have a baby. Like, also, the moment the baby gets here, nobody cares how it got here. They're like, oh, it's a baby. So the one thing that was stuck in my head was my grandmother, who I love dearly and loves me. And she's been a runner. She's like my bestie. She's from a different time. And I was worried. This was something I made up, nothing she ever said, something I made up in my own head, that when I went to her and said, Grandma, I'm going to have a baby on my own, that her reaction to me was going to be so soul crushing that I thought she was going to say, well, Nicci, why don't you want to wait for a man? That I couldn't physically handle that to respond to her that I was just going to like start crying and run out of the room. So my therapist and I did some role play, and she helped me work on that. And, but having a third party like a therapist, and, you know, there's a million different ways you can access therapy nowadays, and it can be expensive, it cannot be, but maybe it's a friend, but having a third party, like really work through whatever those roadblocks are, ended up being really useful for me.
Yeah. Can we expand on, like, let's deep dive a little bit more on like these fears and considerations, right? Clearly, this is a huge decision for anybody to go through. And it sounds like in general, you've had the social like support, at least from your close family and friends who like their judgment means something to you, right? Not just like overall social judgment, but were there other considerations and fears that you had going into this, right? Part of it is, what is my grandma, or what does society think about this? But also, I mean, for me, truthfully, like I see a lot of people can't afford childcare, even for folks who are two, like partners, have a partner who might be working. People have to sometimes leave the workforce, or one partner has to leave the workforce because they can't afford childcare. And, you know, the three of us, we're lucky enough to have a good job, good pay, good insurance. But were those things that you were worried about at all?
So yes. So when I moved to Colorado, LinkedIn cut my pay by 18%.
Mm,
And then I get a text from my manager when I was like at Geo was like 6 weeks, and I was like at my like follow-up doctor appointment, and he was like, FYI, it's good news, check your email. He like made me whole, and I just started bawling. That 18% difference was a huge
mhm,
difference maker for me and being able to afford it. There's also a $5,000 dependent daycare FSA. So it comes out of my paycheck pre-tax. I want to be super transparent with everyone on this call. I'm going to give you some hard numbers. My nature is to, I'm a seeker. I would have been like a pioneer in the Neanderthal world. I would have been at the front of the tribe. Where are we going? Who we hunting? That's me. Okay. That would have been my role. I didn't think too deeply about a lot of things that I probably could have, and I'm happy to share them here. The
mhm,
cost of daycare was not one of those things I thought about. I figured I would just find a way. I have been a disciplined saver my whole life, not a disciplined spender. I've been working with a financial consultant since I was 24. So there are some things in place that I felt I had guardrails for, 401k, retirement, and death benefit.
mhm,
So maybe because those things were in place, I didn't think too deeply about it, but for everyone, I would. I pay $20,000 a year for daycare. That is a lot of money.
mhm, mhm.
And it makes it so that I can't do a lot of the things I want to do until she goes to school when she's 5.
It's crazy. That's
So
that's
they're
the hard truth people need to
hard
accept,
truth.
though.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. But every moment, like, and we can get into some other things about the difficulty of motherhood, but that the planning and the prep around it was not something I did because I had this, what I'm now finding out in a lot of the therapy I'm doing now is really a false sense of control, because I was like, I'm an ultra runner. I can do this, this, and this. I've got the strength. I've got the problem solving. I've got the training and resilience. I think I have these skills that I have relied on that are going to get me through. This is going to be no problem. That was
Mhm,
actually my perspective. That's probably 80% true. Now, being on the other side of it, there's a lot that I have done in my life that has prepared me to do this on my own. Here's the real reality. And I didn't know this without having the woman I got connected with. She's a perinatal trauma specialist. So she specializes in women that go through trauma during birth. Brilliant therapist, best one I've ever had. And I've been in therapy since I was 16. She is local in the Springs. We figured out that one of the toughest things being a single parent is not having backup. So when
mhm,
Gia's sick, am I giving her the right dose of Tylenol? Oh my God, I read the description on the box 10 times, but I don't know if this is right. Am I doing it right? She's crying. The doubt, I don't have backup to be like, it's okay, we got this together. So that's
mhm.
one thing that I carry with me all the time that I didn't realize how heavy of a load that might be. but that's okay. Here we are. The other thing that I think was a potentially false narrative in my head was there are a million single moms out there. What makes me any different? Blah, 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 blah. My therapist was like, Nicci, this is X Games parenting. Like, she would hold up a mirror to me and be like, look, she's a military spouse. And when her spouse would leave, she had 3 babies at home by herself. And that was hard, right? Same thing as I'm doing. Here's the difference. I'm also responsible financially for Gia. So I'm the only one holding down the fort financially. And so again, that's an emotional carry load that I'm carrying. Was I prepared to think through these emotional things? No. But do I have the skill of seeking out help and therapy? Yes. And working on myself? Yes. So there's all of that. Now, the last thing I do want to say that is so wildly important is that my sister and I live together. She moved in with me during the pandemic. We were roommates. She had quit her job. The world was upside down. She's like, can I come live with you in Colorado? I'm like, oh my God, please come live with me. We've been having the best time. 6 months into that, I'm like starting this fertility journey. We go from a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. I'm like, we need a bigger place. So we rent this a house that we're in. We're now bought the house we're in. But like, we're a modern family. My sister and I live together, and she is hands down like a second parent in a lot of ways, not all of them, but like, she is there. And so there's an aspect that I have that, and I actually ended up meeting another woman here in the spring. She's a single mother by choice. That woman doesn't have another person in her home,
Right.
around the child. And Gia is obsessed with her Auntie Haley. And so like, there's just a different level of that. And so for people who are listening to this call, and like Sabrina, as you're thinking about that, I wish I had thought a little more deeply about what is my support around me. Haley was built in, but like my mom, and my mom's here now, like that might have been a little bit more of like a deliberate choice of like, maybe I should move to the state where my mom lives before doing this or something like that.
Like it takes a village, right?
Yes.
To raise a child. And so this just further reinforces the need to be fully prepared and how big of a choice this is, because it really does impact not only your life, but even the family around you and the friends around you, their lives as well.
Totally. I'll share an additional blind spot that you just made me think of, which is that I'm bad at asking for help. I don't know, is anyone good at it? I'm bad at accepting help. And part of that is me needing to learn that people are able to set their own boundaries. So if I ask for help, they can say no, and I don't have to control or worry about their answer. But it is important that I ask for help. There's been a couple times where I've been so sleep deprived. My sister will be like, can I take Gia tonight? And I'm like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, what? And I'll hem and haw. And she goes, Nicci, just say yes. And I've talked about this with my therapist, and she's like, this is clearly something that you've not done in your life, that you don't have the muscle, you haven't built that can I ask for help muscle. And I'm like, okay, like let's practice that. And so maybe some people who are thinking about becoming a single mother by choice is like, oh no, like I'm golden, like ready to ask for help. Maybe not.
Can you speak a little bit more about one of the earlier points that you talked about, which is like now you are the primary caretaker and decision maker for your child? Like this is something Sabrina and I, we kind of talked about ahead of time as we were planning for this, is there's good and bad to it, right? Like there's a ton of pressure on that single parent. But I guess I'm wondering, does it in a way give you freedom and full ownership, like in a very empowering way where you don't need a partner's permission? You don't need, right? Like you are making the sole decision for what is best for your child. Like what's been your experience? Is it more positive or more like anxiety inducing?
Yeah, for me, it's more positive. Again, I think it's in my nature that I'm like, oh, no, I know exactly what we're doing. I know this, and this. I'm a very like values driven person. And I know that if I show up with leadership values, empathy, compassion, asking Gia questions instead of telling her what to do. Like I've mapped all this out in my Evernote and thought deeply about it and written about it. And I'm excited for when she, a lot of people talk about like the teenage years. Like I'm excited for when she's a teenager, we're doing homework, she's doing something else in her life she's passionate about. And I am her ally. I'm not her friend necessarily, but I am going to be there for her when she falls, when she takes risks, when she learns about sex, when she's in first grade and has to communicate her own story about coming from a donor. I am ready to like communicate. Now those are all things that come from me. So if anyone's listening, they're like, oh, I'm not quite sure I could do that. There's still a path forward, just figuring out what makes most sense for you. But for me, making those decisions feels very empowering. Part of the thing I will share with you though is that took time for me to build up the confidence to be able to give you that answer. I think what a lot of people don't see when any of us either make a decision or come across success or whatever is that there were 10,000 tiny little right turns that led up to that moment where I had a baby on March 2nd, 2023 on my own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the decision to be able to know the values and the structure that in the environment that I'm going to create for her in this home took a long time to curate. But one of the things that was a struggle for me with that narrative, like, oh my God, you don't have a partner, you don't have a man with you, blah, 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 was, well, who is Gia going to be surrounded by? And I was like, okay, well, she's going to have her aunties, Haley, her grandma, and then all of these other amazing women here in Colorado that I have built a community that's taken 3 years to do. But we've got women business owners, electrical engineer, PhD. We've got other runners. We've got women who are Instagram influencers that are foodies, a variety of people that are going to be, because I don't have a partner, who's going to enter the stage left to influence her life that I'm going to specifically curate around her. Because you've heard the thing, like you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right.
I think deeply about who she's surrounded by.
Yeah.
I really love that because I think that's something Jay and I talked about as well. For me, I was super curious to hear your perspective on that, right? As Gia grows up and as she gets more curious and as she asks you questions like, hey, where's dad? Or something like that. Like clearly you already put a lot of thought into that. Like and I mean, worst case scenario, right? Like kids at school are sometimes the worst, right? People might ask, yeah, what's happening? Where's your dad? Or things like that. And God forbid, but like what are some other things that you want her to know as she asks more of those questions?
Yeah, so I think it starts with like, I wanted you in this world so badly and so deeply. And the fact that you are here is the most amazing thing in the whole world. Thank you for being here, Gia. Your presence and your being in this world is so important and powerful. And you are amazing just as you are. And so there's like that layer. I will also admit I benefit from one of my best friends in the world, her and her spouse, they're females. They are raising 3 boys. So they also went through a sperm donor. And so I have benefited from some of the things they've thought about and the way they've communicated to their sons about like what, because things come up at school, family tree, for example, mom, donor. You know what I mean? So mom, 2 moms, donor. Just presenting Gia with the most authentic and transparent thing is my goal, and giving her the language and the narrative so that she can go up against the objection she's going to face at school. She's going to face that. Right. And she's going to come home and have this bedrock and this foundation of all these people that love her and the knowledge that she matters. And hopefully that's enough. But I have thought about those things, but I've also benefited from people who've come before me.
Yeah. Oh, that is really beautiful. I think that makes a lot of sense, and just leading with authenticity and transparency. So like so far in raising Gia, what has been the best part? Like what are things that may be easier for a solo parent versus having a partner? What are some of the most fulfilling things that you learned?
Yeah. Gosh, this is such an interesting question because it's pretty difficult Like, if someone came to me before I had the baby, even while I was pregnant, and was like, here's what being a parent is like, whether you carried the baby, whether you're a male, female, biological man, woman, doesn't matter. Here's what raising an infant feels like, how hard it is, the resilience it requires, the mind games you go through in the middle of the night, the isolation that you feel. Even like, I would hold Gia when she's like 6 weeks old on my couch, 2 a.m. You know, she's up every 90 minutes, and I'm watching all the Premier League games. And I had been like recording Premier League on my YouTube TV forever, and I never watched any of the games. I just like love soccer. I played soccer all my life. When I was up in the middle of the night, guess what we watched? Nonstop Premier League. But despite my mom and sister both being in the house at that time, still doesn't matter. You're isolated. Doesn't matter if you're single, mother by choice. If you are by yourself with an infant, you feel immediately isolated. Like the rest of the world can't understand. And I mention all of this because you probably heard someone say it's the highest highs and the lowest lows of parenthood. And I heard that a million times before becoming a parent. And it's true. But there would be no way for someone to have said that to me and for me to have understood what that means until I got here. I'll give you an example. So every night now, I'm holding Gia and I'm trying to like rock her to sleep. And we're in this sleep stage where like I can kind of get her mostly to sleep and lay her in her bed. She'll cry a little bit and then she'll knock out. Sometimes she'll fall asleep in my arms. But if she's particularly restless, I'll be like rocking her and holding her, and she'll be like facing out, and then she'll like fling herself around and face me. And when she's flinging herself around, the first couple nights that she was doing this and she would face me, I thought she just wanted to like lay on my shoulder. And instead she kind of sat up and like looked at me. And I was like, and my immediate reaction was exhaustion. I'm like, oh, Gia, come on, please just go to sleep, right? We're talking, it's like 7 p.m. and I can't wait to hit the bed at 7:05. She turns around and she looks at me and she smiles and she goes, and I start singing like Barney to her, and I'm like, I love you. And she's just smiling and laughing. And I'm like, I just experienced joy and despair at the same time. And there's no decoupling that. And so making peace with that is this new experience that like no one could have prepared me for. So thinking about what those highs and lows are going to be as a parent is probably going to be different for everybody. I think the only thing is like, I wish I had maybe been told, and I would tell everyone listening to this, is like, you have the skills and the abilities, and I promise you the deep resilience inside of you to get through anything that shows up. I promise you can do it. Don't worry, you can do it. But no one said
that. I think that's such a great lesson for everyone. And because you were talking about earlier how just what are all the things that you didn't know, but I feel like sometimes it's almost worse to be too prepared, because then you would never take that step, right? So for you to take that leap of faith, at some point we just got to jump in the pool, and then yes, we'll figure it out. So I just love how you translate some of those learnings from your ultra marathon to now, yeah, whatever Gia brings to you, you'll figure it out. We're all humans. We've done this for centuries, raising kids. I mean, not on our own necessarily all the time, but yeah, you're just so inspiring. I just really love your like go get it mindset. Whatever we put our mind to, we can achieve.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that ties into a lot of the things we want to talk about around like growth, right? And sounds like you've grown a lot. But is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about your own personal growth? How has Gia shaped that?
Yeah, so we preface this a little bit at the beginning of the call. So I had a near-death experience during birth. I had something called an amniotic fluid embolism. So I had a planned C-section because Gia was breached. Her feet were down by my cervix and her head was up by my ribs. And we couldn't flip her. We even tried to do a procedure called an inversion, like 3 days before the planned C-section. Literally all it is the, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but the OB comes in, you're like laying on the bed and you've got all these monitors strapped to your belly so they can like read the baby's heart rate and like your own heart rate. Like you're hooked up, like you're in the hospital So they're going to do this inversion where they literally, my doctor tried to push Gia's head and flip her down so she could come out, right? And he was pushing so hard that he started sweating. And I was like, hey, doc, like if this isn't going to work, like plan B, man, it's fine. So C-section was scheduled, and it was because Gia's head was like attached to the placenta. Now, come to find out, like, it's really serendipitous that this all ended up this way, because when they pulled her out, it's fine. But then when they pull my placenta out, the amniotic fluid gets in your body. And some people, very rare, is an 80% mortality rate, have a reaction to that. It was like an allergic reaction, they kind of call it. And I started hemorrhaging blood. I passed out on the table. So I only know this because I read, like, I understand what happened now. And a clot headed, the amniotic fluid just wreaked havoc on my vascular system, sent a clot to my heart and my lung, and I had a full cardiac collapse. So I was out on the table. They saved me. There's some really interesting stories that came out where the anesthesiologist, she's the director of anesthesia, and the only reason she was there, directing traffic behind my head, was because my friend Jared is an anesthesiologist, and he was like, oh my gosh, you're having a C-section. I'm going to pick the best one. Her name's Dr. Booth. She's amazing. And I'm like, great. Dr. Booth had gone to a seminar about AFEs the week before, and she had remembered that there were 3 drugs you're supposed to give someone having an AFE. And she didn't remember the dosage of the drugs. She remembered the names of them. She downloaded the seminar on her phone in the OR, found out what the dosage was, and gave it to me. And I can now go back in my medical documents and see what the drugs were. So she saved me, and everyone in the room saved me, stitched me back up. I was out for about 5 hours. I woke up in the ICU, very confused. Okay, guys, what's up? Where are we at? Like, why were these cords in my body? Where's my baby? So a very traumatic way to enter the world. And I'll tell you one other funny thing that I actually don't remember, but that happened. And then we'll get back to how this has shaped me. But apparently the ICU nurse, she was like from Brooklyn, and she saw, my name is very Italian as it reads. And she's like, what would you like to eat? This is the first thing I ordered. And I go, and apparently I said, and my mom and sister heard this too. There's a lot that's going on when you wake up from a trauma like this. So it's not surprising I don't remember this, but I said a meatball sub. She laughs and she's like, the hospital doesn't have a meatball sub, but you must be Italian. So I got out of the hospital 6 days later. My mom and sister were the ones to bring Gia home. She was okay. She got discharged before I did. I had to learn how to nurse her with all these cords, and like, it just was a really, really difficult experience. And one of the nurses on like day 3 sat me down before she started caring for me, and she goes, how are you? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, how am I spiritually, or how am I like physically right now? She goes, spiritually. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. Like, I'm very aware that something really bad happened, but I have no idea. At that point, I had no idea what occurred. And I just knew it was really bad. And she goes, I have someone I want you to talk to. And she took me to Kristen Lauer Counseling. Everyone can look this up. She's phenomenal. She's done a ton of work. And we're now doing EMDR. And so I reached out to this therapist. So EMDR, I don't even know what it stands for. You'll have to Google it. But it's a way of accessing the trauma through my subconscious to find out what's back there, get to the bottom of it, and allow me to no longer have trauma responses like having flashbacks, or being unable to process like other traumatic things that I see. So like, if I hear about someone that has died or something that's going on, doesn't even matter what the scenario is, I have a trauma response to that. Mm-hmm. So I've become very aware of all of this, and I'm able to even talk to you all about it without crying, because I've done this work for 15 months now. So not dying and having a baby at the same time, she reminds me very often that this is a tall order that I am being presented with in my life, to have processed motherhood and this at the same time. But she's like, together we can have post-traumatic growth. And I am learning so many things about loss of control and how to live as a type my OB called me type AAA. I showed up to my C-section with a PowerPoint that was bound and had 10 pages about how I wanted the day to go. He goes, "Oh, you're not type A, you're type AAA." Practicing letting go of that control, because I had an experience that had total loss of control. How do I reconcile the way I used to live with now the reality that we don't have control? And I'm practicing that. And it's actually the deep surrender feels a lot better than how I was living my life before. And it's a skill and a reality that I would rather Gia live a life of someone who can hold two things at once. Like, I'm going to do the best I can, but surrender the outcome is not the way I was living before this. And it served me. I've done well in my career. I've done well at the things I wanted to do. It doesn't serve me anymore.
I'm shook to my core is all I can say, because Nicci, I honestly appreciate you giving us the heads up prior to recording this. Like, for our listeners, the reason why we were able to give that trigger warning is because we had the heads up, but I had no idea that this story was going to be, I mean, like, just thank you for sharing that, because that was the reality that you lived
Yeah.
through. It's
Right.
just insane.
And it's not any, you, what? Like, and I was so confused. I'm like, wait, I'm in an ICU for women who had babies. I'm like, why are there ICUs for women that have babies? Doesn't everyone just like have a baby and everything's fine?
Mm-mm.
Doesn't get talked about enough, right? How
Talked about.
dangerous
No.
birth is, actually.
And I've heard now stories of women that, you know, didn't have a near-death experience, but one of my friends was in labor for 48 hours and then had an unplanned C-section. What? So
Trauma.
like, I do think it's like this space that y'all have created to talk about all this is the path forward.
We hope so. We sure hope so, because, and the thing is, like, everyone's birth story is different. Every single woman or mom that we've talked to have had a completely different experience, right? Like, many are traumatizing in each of their own ways. So thank you so much for sharing that and being so vulnerable. I can't imagine. Like, part of it gave me a little bit of fear. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. It gave me a little bit of fear. But I think what I took out of this is, like, what you came out of this, right? Is like, there are a lot of things that we can plan for. And yes, we should, think and plan through a lot of this stuff ahead of time if we can. However, a big part of having children is this unplanned experience. Like, this is actually a good skill to have, is to be able to let go of control to some degree and live in that uncomfortable situation.
Totally. Get comfortable with that discomfort.
Can you talk a little bit about self-care? But for you, like, you are the primary caregiver to your child. And you kind of mentioned, like, you can't just turn that off, right? And have that, like, separate time. So how do you create space? It does sound like you go through therapy and, like, you do give that, like, recovery and time for yourself. But also for like daily things like gym time, alone time, quiet time. How do you go about navigating that?
Yeah, so I think it's been a journey to figure out the definition of self-care for myself. There's like surface level things that, like, we all hear that word and we're like, manicures, facials, quiet time in a dark room and the air conditioning. Like, there might be like surface level things that are a quick fix, and we actually do need those, because very likely I'm getting my nails done with a friend and that's like a cup filler. But what are like the deep nervous system rests? What are the deep, meaningful cup fillers? And having clear answers for that. And this was kind of happening naturally before I had a baby, but my favorite times are with my ultra running community. So there's 9 races in a year for this Human Potential Running Series, which is the series I run with. And they're all in the Front Range of Colorado. So they're about an hour and a half from my house. And they're anywhere between 10-mile distances up to 200-mile distances. So I'm either running in the race every time there's a race, it's almost one every month, or I am volunteering. I will go and volunteer and spend the day. Now that requires a ton of planning. Haley's either watching Gia, and that's all day. I leave at the house at 6 a.m. and I come home maybe after Gia's gone to bed. So that's been a huge adjustment, where Haley and I have to have those really clear communication conversations of like, what does this look like for you and your life, Haley? If not, I have some other babysitters that I have found over time that will watch her. But that is a deliberate choice. I'm going to go do that because I know it's a cup filler and my favorite thing in the world. So there's that. Then I do know that therapy is so vitally important, not only just like for like base survival right now for me to exist in the world, but because I'm a seeker, I truly enjoy it. As painful as it is, I want to get to the bottom of things. And so I enjoy that hour and a half. So she can go to daycare as early as 7 a.m. and get picked up as late as 5:30. So when it comes to work, I have committed myself to starting work as early as I possibly can and finishing as early as I possibly can and communicating those boundaries to my customers. I'm lucky because I'm in mountain time. Most of my customers are central. So I can end my day around 3:34 and that's the end of the day. And I can go pick her up early. But I will get on email and start around 7:30. So I'll drop her off at 7 and I will try to go get a workout in, whether I go run on the trails for 30 minutes or I grab a CrossFit class, which is a little longer, about an hour, that I'm eating into sort of like my lunchtime. But I am making these deliberate choices. So daycare is a huge help. They are the one thing that allows me during the day to get something done that I know, like on a very consistent basis, is going to fill my cup.
Yes. So many great lessons here. And yeah, just ultimately also the power of community, right? Which is something I love how you talk about mom guilt too, because you can never please everyone and anyone, but just to focus on this will make me a better mom and a better person. I think anchoring on that is super powerful. So we're coming up at the end of our episode. I was going through all the emotions. I was having tears when you shared about the birth story. It's just such a blessing that not what you went through, but that you were alive and healthy now, and Gia is alive and healthy, and
Thank you.
oh my gosh. So for our listeners that may be considering this, myself included, potentially, what are some of your recommendations on getting started? Obviously, you said to us that you did a lot of Googling. Are there any particular communities or pages that you may want to plug where people can just get more information? Also, like sperm donor, what you shared that there is like actually a lot of supply in the US. I had no idea that it differed by continent. So things of that nature, like any other things you would want to plug on how to get started on this decision?
Yeah, so I would Google a couple things. I would just go on Progeny's website. There's a ton of resources that they have in general. You're going to learn about what it means to, what is IVF? What does that even mean? What is IUI? What makes potential sense for you based on what you know? Can you get blood work done on your own? Like, go bananas. Harness your inner seeker and just do that research. So that there's that. I would just say start with Progeny's website. I went through CNY Fertility. They have many locations around the United States. They actually have a very inexpensive, I think it's like $4,000 or something for IVF, which is like 10 times less than most IVF. They make it very affordable and they have tons of resources on their site as well. Regarding the cryobank, so I used California Cryobank. I would look up, there's a ton of cryobanks around the US. The reason I use that one is because my friends recommended it, the same sex couple in Chicago, because they used it and they had wanted a donor that was diverse. And for some reason, I also felt compelled to have a diverse donor. I'm like, you know what? I'm Sicilian and Norwegian. This baby's going to be a child of the world. I ended up choosing a donor that was Korean. And so when you go on the site, you can actually do a ton of searching without having to sign up for a subscription. And so just getting really familiar with what that looks like, what the process is, tiny questions about like, okay, well, how many vials from each donor? And like, how does that even work? And I don't know, there's a ton on there and there's like tons of people that are there to help. It's clearly a really big business around the world. And so like, knowing that, it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. And these companies are making a ton of money. And what a beautiful thing that these like biological men have chosen to do, because it truly is like such a gift. And so, yeah, like getting really curious about the process, what everything means definition wise, and then curious about your own body. That blood work, I don't know if there's a way to like, without starting the fertility journey with like somehow getting your insurance to pay for you to just whatever fertility blood work that means. I don't even know what they all measure, but like, I'm sure you could find that out. Can you get that done? Can you find out what are your hormone levels? What are your egg levels? Like, what are these things that you need to know about yourself? I, would have done years and years and years ago, because I started this process when I was 36 and I had a baby when I was 38, and now I'm 39 with like a 1-year-old. So like time flies. But you have the power. You have the control. This is the perfect control.
Folks come on our podcast talking about how this particular blood work help them make a decision on, should I have my kid now, or should I have a kid, or can I even have a kid in the future?
Like, if it doesn't feel natural for someone listening to this to be like, I'm going to go, look this up, and that feels strange. The other thing that I did find myself having to work a little harder to do, but I did do, was receive. When people would say, hey, I know this person, do you want to talk with them? Saying yes. And I had a lot of conversations with people that I came out of the woodwork, that I learned a lot from. And again, accepting help and saying yes to that means that you're also sharing your own vulnerable story. But like, oh my gosh, the richness that can come from that inbound is unmatched as well.
This is amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Help us understand, before you go, help us understand what is next for you in your journey. It sounds like you would be open to having more kids down the line.
Yes.
What are you thinking? And also let our audience know, especially just knowing that we have girlfriends who are exploring this as their option as well. Can people come to you with questions? Where can people find you? Tell us about your next steps.
Yeah, so I'm Nicci Bosco on Instagram. You can maybe include that in the show notes. Reach out to me there, Nicci Bosco at Gmail, reach out to me there. So I have these 3 embryos, and it costs $600 a year to keep them. Thinking about donating them, and I've heard stories of people who've gotten donated embryos, and they are just it is the most grateful, like hearing those stories. I'm like, oh my God, I would love to give an embryo away. I'm not ready. And especially with this traumatic event, my therapist was like, don't make any decisions, at least for sure after a year, like wait. And she's like, can you afford to just pay that $600 in perpetuity for a while? And I said, yeah. She's like, Cameron Diaz had a baby at 51. I'm like, she did?
Oh, I didn't know.
So knowing that I'm not going to carry another child, I think I could still take care of an infant at like 45. Like I'm trying to be vibrant. I'm going to hold on to those embryos, but for now I have more questions than answers. Because if I did donate, what does that mean? Like ethically, like in the world, I'm like, that would be my blood out there with the family. Like I would say like, go forth and prosper to that family. Like, hallelujah, go with that baby. But like, I don't know, what if something happens to that family? Like, that's my blood. Am I morally, ethically responsible? Like, there's a lot of questions before getting to the point of choosing to donate. I have tried dating, and that didn't work. I am going to wait until Gia's a little bit older, because it's really hard to take care of an infant and be up all night, and then also like make mind share and space to like be vulnerable with someone. So that's not working out. But if Tim Ferriss happens to listen to this, I would talk with you, Tim.
That's good.
And I'm on this path where, I've been writing a lot for a long time, and I think that one day I would like to write something. They say if you're going to write a book, write the story that needs to get told, that you need to hear. And so what is the book that I need to write because I need to hear it? What's the book that needs to be written in the world that's coming from me? And no doubt it's going to be about this near-death experience that I survived, that I'm lucky to be alive. Gia's lucky to be alive. We are here. But what does that look like? And, I'm a little too close to the trauma, so it's probably going to be years away. But for now, I am on that journey and reading and writing and running. I would like to complete the Barkley marathons one day, but I have zoomed out on these big life goals. I've set a goal, achieve it, set a goal, achieve it. It's me and Gia now. And so when I choose to do something, it's her too. And so I'm loosening up the time frame in which I would like to do these things in my life, but I still think about them. So,
Well, listen, Gia's very lucky to have such a strong woman in her life. Many women actually in her
yeah,
life, not just her mom. Many, many
yeah,
women in her life
many.
that are strong and independent. So I'm sure she's going to be learning a lot from all of you. And thank you again so much for joining us and sharing your story. And like always, we would love to hear from our listeners as well. For our listeners, anybody who is thinking about going through this, if this is top of mind for you, or this is like a new thing that you're now intrigued by as a potential option for you, we would love to hear from you. Please write to us at where'sthelinepod@gmail.com. And as always, you can subscribe wherever you listen to us. We are on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Thank you all so much for listening.